In 1920, the U.S. Army was trying to better understand how military officers evaluated the soldiers under their command. To do that, officers were asked to rate each soldier on several different qualities. Not just one overall score, but individual traits such as intelligence, leadership, reliability, physical ability, character, and even appearance. The idea seemed simple. Each quality was supposed to be judged independently. A soldier could be physically strong but a poor leader. Another could be highly intelligent but average in appearance. There was no reason for these ratings to influence one another. The man responsible for analyzing these evaluations was psychologist Edward Thorndike, one of the leading researchers of human learning and behavior. As he examined the results, he noticed something that shouldn't have been happening. Again and again, officers gave higher ratings across almost every category to soldiers who had made a good first impression. If a soldier looked confident, stood tall, or simply appeared more impressive, he was also more likely to be rated as more intelligent, more capable, a better leader, and even a better person. The ratings were supposed to measure separate qualities. Instead, one positive impression was quietly influencing them all. Thorndike realized he wasn't just looking at military evaluations. He had uncovered a hidden bias in the human mind, one that affects how we judge people every single day. He called it the halo effect. So, what exactly is the halo effect? Imagine you're meeting two people for the first time. The first person is well-dressed, confident, smiles warmly, and speaks with certainty. The second person is just as knowledgeable, just as honest, and just as capable, but they're shy, nervous, and struggle to make eye contact. Now, before either of them has had the chance to prove who they really are, your brain has already started making decisions. You might assume the first person is more intelligent, more trustworthy, a better leader, maybe even a better person. But here's the question. How do you know any of that? The truth is, you don't. Your brain simply took one positive quality, confidence, and quietly used it to fill in the blanks. That's the halo effect. The halo effect is a psychological bias where one positive characteristic makes us believe someone has many other positive characteristics, even when we have absolutely no evidence that it's true. And the surprising part is that this doesn't only happen with confidence. It happens with appearance, with fame, with success, even with the brands we buy. Think about a smartphone made by a company you love. Because you've had a good experience with one of their products, you might automatically believe everything they make is high quality, a new laptop, a pair of headphones, even a product you've never used before. One good experience creates a kind of invisible halo around the entire brand. We do the exact same thing with people. If someone is attractive, we may assume they're kinder. If they're funny, we may assume they're more intelligent. If they're wealthy, we may assume they're more capable. One positive quality quietly spreads into every other judgment we make. The strange part is that we rarely notice it's happening. It feels completely natural. It doesn't feel like we're making assumptions. It feels like we're simply seeing people for who they are. But in reality, our brains are often filling in missing pieces with nothing more than a first impression, and that invisible shortcut influences far more of our lives than most of us ever realize. The most dangerous thing about the halo effect isn't that it changes how we see people. It's that it can trap us in relationships that we should have questioned from the very beginning. Think about someone who is incredibly charming. They know exactly what to say, they make you laugh, they're confident, attractive, and everyone seems to like them. Because of those qualities, your brain starts protecting them. When they make a rude comment, you tell yourself they were just having a bad day. When they ignore your feelings, you assume they didn't mean it. When someone warns you about them, you defend them without even thinking. Little by little, that invisible halo keeps making excuses for behavior you would never accept from someone else. This is one reason toxic relationships can be so difficult to recognize, not because the warning signs aren't there, but because the halo effect makes them harder to see. The opposite can happen too. Someone who is shy, awkward, or quiet may never get the chance to show who they really are. One weak first impression can cause people to overlook kindness, loyalty, honesty, and genuine character. In other words, the halo effect doesn't just make us overestimate some people, it can make us underestimate others, and that's what makes it so powerful. It doesn't change reality, it changes the story your brain tells you about reality. Sometimes that story is true, but sometimes it's completely wrong. And by the time we realize it, we've already trusted the wrong person, ignored the right one, or built an entire relationship based on an illusion that existed only inside our own minds. So, if the halo effect is part of the way our brains work, can we ever escape it? The answer is both yes and no. You can't stop your brain from creating a first impression. That happens automatically. Within just a few seconds of meeting someone, your mind has already started building a story about who they are. The real choice comes afterward. Do you let that first impression become your final judgment? Or do you challenge it? Psychologists often recommend something surprisingly simple. Separate what you know from what you assume. For example, instead of thinking, "He's confident, so he'll probably be a great leader," ask yourself, "What evidence do I actually have that he's a great leader?" Or instead of saying, "She seems kind," ask, "What has she actually done that shows kindness?" It's a small change, but it forces your brain to slow down instead of relying on shortcuts. The same idea applies in everyday life. When you meet someone new, don't let one conversation define their entire personality. When someone makes one mistake, don't assume that's who they are forever. And when someone impresses you with one good quality, remember that every person is far more complicated than a single first impression. That's actually where the name halo effect comes from. In paintings throughout history, saints and angels were often shown with a glowing halo above their heads. That halo symbolized goodness, purity, and virtue. Psychologists borrowed that image because our minds do something remarkably similar. When we notice one outstanding positive quality, it's as if we place an invisible halo above that person's head. Without realizing it, that halo begins to shine over everything else. It doesn't change who they are, it changes how we see them. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. The halo effect isn't proof that people are good or bad. It's proof that our minds love simple stories. But people aren't simple. No one can be understood from a smile, a first impression, a confident voice, or a single moment. The more willing we are to look beyond that invisible halo, the closer we come to seeing people as they truly are, not as our brains first imagined them. The halo effect has been shaping human decisions for as long as people have been judging one another. Long before psychologists gave it a name, it quietly influenced who we trusted, who we admired, who we listened to, and sometimes who we walked away from. What's fascinating is that the halo effect isn't a flaw in your intelligence. It's simply the brain trying to make sense of the world as quickly as possible. The problem is that people are far too complex to be understood in just a few seconds. Every person has qualities you can see and many more that you can't. A confident person can be deeply insecure. A quiet person can be incredibly wise. Someone who seems perfect at first can hide serious flaws. And someone who makes a terrible first impression may become one of the best people you'll ever meet. That's why the most valuable habit isn't learning to trust your first impression. It's learning to question it. Because sometimes taking a little more time to understand someone can completely change the way you see them. The next time you meet someone new, ask yourself one simple question. Am I seeing this person for who they really are, or for the story my brain created after the first few seconds? You might be surprised by the answer. And now I'm curious about your experience. Have you ever met someone you instantly liked or instantly disliked, only to discover later that your first impression was completely wrong? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to read it.